Hello, Fringers. I'm still completely blown away by the response to the Infinite One Round Granny Square tutorial. So many of you have been experimenting with these little squares, and I've loved seeing all the awesome projects you've been making. But a lot of people said, I love those squares, but I want to use more color, and that got me thinking. If you've been following my tutorials, you know that Breakaway Crochet is all about continuous crochet motifs. That usually means not cutting the yarn and avoiding those pesky yarn tails. But many of you don't mind breaking the rules a little if it means more color. So today we're going to explore how to create projects with more than one color while still keeping yarn tails to a minimum. But before we go any further, I have an important update. Since these little granny squares resemble little cheese crackers, I'm going to start calling them cracker squares, which are made by doing cracker stitch. That's much easier to say. I should also say that I thoroughly covered the details for doing these cracker stitch squares in previous videos, and I will not be repeating most of that information. Instead, I want to go over just the new information you will need for working this stitch with more than one color. So, to get the most out of this series, I suggest that you prepare by learning how to work these cracker squares by heart without having to refer to pattern instructions. So, moving along here, I'm going to do a couple of things. The first is to whet your appetite for things I will be covering in this series, such as basic stripes, scrappy patchwork squares, center out designs, checkerboard patterns, zigzags, triangular layouts, and some general guidelines for making your own designs. For the tutorial part of this video, let's start with simple stripes and then move on to patchwork squares. So let's start with a sample which is worked from bottom to top, and each stripe goes from edge to edge. So let's start with this first stripe of green squares at the bottom of the piece. And everything is going to go pretty much like the original sample, with the exception of one or two little updates here. Now you notice I started my first floating double crochet without a slip knot. Alright, I'm doing that just to avoid a knot that might show up in the finished work, and besides it's quicker. So if you would like to try this, all I'm doing is putting an extra yarn over before I make the floating double crochet, and of course that counts as the slip stitch that would have been on the hook doing it the other way. Okay, so now that I've got that extra yarn over, let's start the floating double crochet with the yarn over. Now the floating ring, which is another yarn over a pinch, yarn over a pinch, yarn over, pull through two to make the floating ring. Yarn over, pull through two, yarn over, pull through two to finish the floating double crochet. And you see there is a floating double crochet made without a slip knot. So you can do it that way too, or if you want to stick with the slip knot, that's fine. Okay, and another update in case you didn't see the last video is how I'm abbreviating this very first starting sequence. So after you do the floating double crochet, you work 2 double crochets into the floating ring, which counts as the first granny cluster. But I've got a new abbreviation. From now on, I'm calling this a handbag. So it looks like a little handle there to a handbag, and that just saves me from having to say floating double crochet, 2 double crochets all the time. So of course starting every little square just like this. So I'll just continue on. And I'm just starting the second square, and there's one more little update after I finish the handbag for this square. Alright, the handbag for the second square. Now I'm coming up to the first corner that is joined to this corner here. And instead of slip stitching in the chain 2 space, from now on with doing this color work and just in general, I'm liking actually going into one of the chains in the chain 2 space instead of the space itself. That just kind of keep things a little bit tidier looking. Alright, so that's update number 2. I'll go ahead and finish this row of green squares for that stripe. And now that I'm at the end of the return row, here's where things might be a little bit unusual. Traditionally, if I wanted to change color and do another row of stripes in a different color up here, I would cut the yarn here, attach the new one, and start off with another foundation row. But that is absolutely not what's going to happen with these little cracker squares when you're working with color. Instead, you will always finish a section of color completely. And what I mean is, once you have done the very last return row in a particular section, that's when you come along and finish the left edge. In this case, since it's only one row, I just lack a granny cluster and chain 2 and slip stitch. Alright, which has finished this little section as if it was its own little project. And now cut the yarn. Ouch. I don't like cutting yarn, but that's my hang up. Okay, so there is our first stripe done. Alright, now to start a new stripe, we are not going to actually attach the new yarn to the first section quite yet, and that's something that's different. Instead, we're actually going to start the next section separately from what we've already done, and starting off by making that first handbag. Okay, and now that we are at the first corner, do a chain 1, and now we join up to what we've done before. So you're finding the top left hand corner in this case, and just find one of those chains and go ahead and slip stitch into one of those chains. And now our second row is joined up. And just continue with the chain 1, granny cluster, chain 1, join, and the rest of the row you should know what to do, just like the solid color sample. And I should also reiterate as I'm working across this row, when you're doing your slip stitches, I'm going to be a little bit picky about that. I like doing these sort of backward slip stitches that you've seen me do many times before, just because I think it is the best looking way to make a slip stitch. If you do that slip stitch any other way, by example, pulling the yarn through, or one that takes a little bit longer, but you can see how it makes that a little green loop there show up, which kind of breaks the line between the two colors. Alright, and I mean, if you do like your own way, that's fine, but I like having a slip stitch like that because it's just much cleaner. And there's our next foundation and return row pretty much finished. Again, if you want to go upstairs and do another row of purple, or make that stripe as tall as you want it, that's perfectly okay. You just continue on as normal. The only difference is when you come to the very last return row, that's your signal to turn the corner, finish the left edge, and finish off the yarn. So I'm ready to do that, to finish this stripe now. Alright, cutting the yarn. Alright, so those are that's pretty much going to happen on every project where you work each section to completion and you start each new section of color separately from what you've done before. So what if you're working on something and you're going along and you run out of yarn mid-row and you haven't gotten to the end of the row in the color you're working on? Well, if you don't mind having more than one color in a row, there's a couple of things you can do. The first is just to change yarn wherever you are, all right, and continue working to the end of the row. Here we are at the end of the foundation row. I should have also said if you had more green to carry on, you would just attach it there like you normally would and carry on as well. But if you've run out of a particular color and need to pick up, go ahead and do that. And now let's do the return row and just have a look at what happens when we do that. So we get this kind of effect happening. When you have your foundation row in one color and the return row in another, you get that fourth granny cluster in a different color. Which if you're doing like a kind of a scrappy project, that could look pretty cool. But if you're wanting to keep your stripes all the same color, then there's something else you can do. I've just gone back to where I was before, where I run out of green yarn. So plan B is to frog back in this color until you feel you've got enough yarn to finish off the squares at the beginning of the row. So I think I might have enough here to finish off 3 squares, and that's all I do. I just pick up right where I am, start the return row early, even though I haven't gone to the end of the row, and just finish up these squares at the beginning. Okay, so now what about the rest of the row? Well, again, we attach a new color, and again we start it separately from the main piece. The handbag, chain 1, and now we're at a joining corner, and this time we've got a different place to join into. So this handbag is going to be the, let me get organized here. This handbag is going to be the northern granny cluster. So as we come along, we're joining this corner into the top right corner there. And we got to make sure we're joined at the top before we move on. And again, find a chain to go through, not the space. Bring the hook up to the right, move the pesky yarn tail out of the way, finish that slip stitch, and that's joined that corner there. Continue on with another granny cluster, and now we've got another joining point here. Alright, so we've got a lot more joins if this should happen to you. Alright, and continue along, and then you'll have one more join in the next corner. So, I'm ready to do that third join. Chain 1 and go ahead and do the 4th granny cluster in this square. Chain 2, and there we are at the breakaway point to go ahead to the next squares of the row. Okay, so you would just finish those squares off, come back with your return row, and when you get to this last square, you just need to finish off with a slip stitch in that top stitch there. What a mess I've got going here. Alright, and that finishes off that second color at the end of the row. Now mind you, this is only going to work, this joining method here, when you're doing stripes that are only one row. We'll get into some variations later on. So just showing you how that would look when you're finished. And the same thing applies for these little sections. You're always going to work the very last stitch into the very first stitch you made of the section. So the yarn tails are always going to be right next to each other, which maybe will relieve some pain when you're weaving in the ends. Okay, so from here you just start again at the beginning of the row and carry on as usual. So if you're wanting to use this in the corner to corner style, you can. The only difference is, again, how you attach the new color when you have either increases or decreases. So let's have a look at that. And I've gone ahead and made that first little square that gets the ball rolling on a piece. Again, I've worked my first section of color all the way around, even though it's just a single square. And let's start the first square in the next color, again away from the piece with a handbag. Okay, and because this is going to be an increase, we need to work a little bit further around this first square. So do the chain 2 and do the second granny cluster and chain 1, and now we're ready to join up. So this is going to sit just to the left of our first little square. So this has to join up in the, again, it's going to be in the top left hand corner. Chain 1. Now be careful here because that piece has to sit off the edge like that. So don't be tempted after the next granny cluster to join again. No, what we need to do is work the third granny cluster in this square, chain 2, and now we're at the breakaway point, and that's where we start the next square above this one, a grid square, and that little cliffhanger. And the return row as usual. Here we go. And now that I've worked the last return row that I want in this section, I finish the left edge and I'm done with this stripe. Okay, now of course if I wanted another row in this color, I would have just carried on either with a decrease or increase, just like in the corner to corner sample. Alright, and then after I've done all the rows in that color again, on that last return row, I finish off the left hand edge and complete the square, or the section. Cut the yarn. Alright, and move on to whatever's next. So the next thing is going to be how to join when you've got a decrease. So let's say I just want to do the very last square at the top. Again, start separately with a handbag, chain 1, and now we're ready to join. And this time, because it's a decrease, we've got to join between the first two squares. So find that slip stitch between the first two squares, join up there, and continue as usual. So there we go, all done with making increases and decreases. It's all a matter of where you join in. So just a very quick review of joining in. When you want to start a new color on a piece that has a straight edge, such as this, start with a handbag, chain 1, join into the top left-hand corner of the section below, chain 1, and continue on. For increases at the edge in the beginning, start with a handbag, chain 2, granny cluster, chain 1, join, chain 1, granny cluster, chain 2, and then carry on. For decreases, start with a handbag, chain 1, join between the first two squares in that slip stitch there, chain 1, granny cluster, and carry on. So let's move along to the next level of color work with these cracker squares and breakaway crochet. What we have here is a series of patchwork squares. This kind of project, of course, is very good for using up your odd yarn scraps. Hopefully your color combination will be better than mine. So if I'm busting your retina out, I'm totally sorry. It's not my forte. It's why I like to work with single colors most of the time. Things are probably not going to get much better, but I'm having a go, and I hope you will too. Okay, but anyway, I can show you how to go on about how to make patchwork squares. So the big difference with this kind of sample is mainly the order in which the sections are worked and how to join one square into another. Okay, so instead of working all the way across back and forth in rows, we're not going to do that. Instead, we go section by section, starting with the bottom right section of color. All right, and actually what we're going to do is work this column as the first piece of our project. So we're only going to think about the first column before we move on to the next one. Now this first column you already know how to do because it is just like working edge to edge stripes. The only difference is I've gone 3 squares wide and I've just done more rows in between. So working this whole section, finishing it off, this section finishing off, and this one. Okay, so things become different when we start the next column. All right, so that's where I will start my little tutorial. What I've done here is worked the first left-hand column, and I've only gone 2 squares instead of the 3 like the other sample. It will be enough to show you what to do. Okay, and now it's a matter of starting the next section next door here. Again, my color choices are not that great. How about some hot pink just to wake you up? Okay, so to start this next column, since each column I'm working as 3 squares wide, we have a different way of starting. But again, we start with our first square, which is going to be separate from the main piece. So I've worked to the 3rd granny cluster in this first square, chain 2, I'll start the next one. There we go, and I'm still going separate from the main piece. I'm starting the third and final square. And again, because I want this section to be 3 squares wide, I've got to pay attention to where I stop on the third square. So what I've done is I've worked to the first, I've done the first and second granny clusters. I'm now at the joining corner, so chain 1, and this is where we joined this corner up to this one here, the bottom left of our main piece. Chain 1, continue with another granny cluster, chain 1, and now you can see we've got another corner to join there. Alright, so easy as we're just turning things kind of sideways. I know my yarn tails are too short there. I thought I was doing a good job of hiding them for this tutorial. Anyway, alright, so there's our second join, chain 1, and start the return row. But before I get across, that's how you join up this column to the one before. Alright, so I'm just going to work to the end. Might start the second row and show you again how this join works. And there we are. I've just worked a normal foundation row, but I've paused here after the second granny square of the last square of the row, and you've got to join the next 2 corners. Again, you know, we should have an instinct for that by now. That first join goes there, granny cluster, and the second join there. Should all make sense. We should be experts by now at joining corners for these little cracker squares. So of course, once that corner's been joined, just work your way back with a return row. Okay, I'm at the end of this return row, and let's just say I don't want to go any further with this glaring hot pink, and that's okay. I don't have to make the squares the same height. So if I want to bail out here, I can. So of course, now that I've done the last return row, I come along and finish this left edge and fasten off the yarn. Okay, so let's go on now. Of course, obviously, the next section of color here, you can just begin joining in this top left hand corner just like we did for the stripes, and then you just continue joining the last square of the row to the first column. Right? So how about we try that in purple just to be flamboyant. Again, so handbag, chain 1, join to the top left hand corner, and continue with the foundation row. Join up in those 2 corners that meet the first column. And we continue with the return row. Add as many more rows of squares as you want. Alright, so I could add 3 more if I wanted, or I could just leave it at just the single one. It's you know, very flexible in that regard. Okay, so of course as you carry on, if you wanted another column that's a different width, that's perfectly all right. You could do something really wide. You could even do something that is only 1 square wide and use that same color all the way up if you wanted a vertical stripe. So even though this is a pretty basic kind of, I don't know, you're only working with squares or rectangles, there's so much flexibility in how you can arrange the squares and sort of arrange your colors. So so feel free to experiment in that regard. So I can also say you don't necessarily have to work in columns. Now that you know that you need to start ahead of time on the bottom row and then join in, and how to join in here, and then how to join in your edges. You can also go about things in like a corner to corner kind of deal, all right, doing squares in this order, or you can work in rows this way. All right, but the thing is, I'm asking you to start whatever way in the bottom right hand corner. So if you go in this order, this means that you will always be able to make all your joins while you are on a foundation row. So let's say you really want to go off the rails. You don't want to have square above square. You might want to have things shifting around a little bit more randomly. And for that, I'm just going to use these blocks to sort of help explain some guidelines to help you figure out the order of how to add each section. So let's pretend each section of color is one of these Lego blocks. And if we think of the bottom of a block is a foundation row, maybe even each side we can have foundation stitches. But definitely these knobs at the top are the return row. So we know things have to be oriented that way. Foundation, return. Again, always start with your first block on the bottom right. All right, and you can come along and put anything you want next door. You might even want a little tiny piece at the end, that's fine. And now that we have something on the bottom, we can start adding pieces on the top. Again, we start from the right edge and move our way across. All right. I mean, I can even put that piece there before I finish this here, because I'm always joining in a foundation row into a return row. Now, what we don't want to happen is adding in a piece up here with something missing below. Okay, so if you think of your Lego pieces, that's not a valid move because you can't get that piece of Lego in there. All right, so even though you could do this in reality with your crochet piece, it's a little bit fiddlier and it just doesn't look quite the same because you have to join in a different way. So I'm not even going to really show you that. I'm just asking you, if you just think about, does it Lego? Then you're going in the right order. So now you've got some new skills to play around with. I definitely encourage some experimentation. Again, there's so many variations of how you can arrange stripes and squares and colors. So have a play around and make sure you keep watching, because in the next video we'll go on to the next sort of style that builds upon what we've done here. So make sure you understand what we've done in this video to get the most out of the next one. So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.